All right, I think we are getting started. Are we live? Okay, all right. Good evening, everyone. The Durham Public Schools Board of Education special meeting is now in session. At this time, we wish to extend a warm welcome to everyone who is joining us this evening. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss selecting superintendent search firm finalists. The interpreters for tonight are Martha Romo Ergiles and Vanessa Peña Ramirez. Thank you for taking the time to join us. All right, so we will begin with the agenda review and approval.
Second.
It's been moved by Ms. Byer, seconded by Ms. Rogers. Is there any other discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, use the same sign. All right, it passes unanimously. And so we will proceed here with our item of selection of superintendent search firms to interview. And I will mention that our chair, Bettina Umstead, is going to join us a little late and virtually. And so we will look forward to seeing her on here in a bit. But now to start, we have several different applicants and candidates. And what we are doing again tonight is to choose 3 to 4 search firms that we want to interview next week. And we will interview search firms on Wednesday, March 20th. And then we will look to make a decision about the finalists, about the one finalist, the search firm that we want to retain on Thursday, March 21st. So that is our process, and that's where we are right now. So thank you to Mr. Malone and Dr. Giovanni for compiling all of these documents and helping us to get started in this process. So I believe we're going to use a table to get started. All right. So with this table, let me ask, is the idea to for each of us to rank or just to indicate which of these 8 firms we are interested in, yes or no?
Go ahead.
So it would be Mr. Malone's recommendation and mine that the board members share with us which firms you are individually interested in, and then kind of see if there is a kind of consensus around a set number of firms. Our recommendation is 3, but obviously the board is free to do more or less than that to interview next week.
Okay, great. So we will take that recommendation of 3 with leaving open the possibility of 4 if we sort of can't decide here. So then let's go through and we can go each person and share your thoughts. And what I'm hoping that we'll do is we'll see clearly that there are some firms that don't rank high and we can kind of put to the side. And then there are some that we don't really need to discuss because we all agree that we should move forward with them.
And one question for you to think about is, do you want to say that each board member would identify their top 3 for now and then see how that plays out with the rankings and then kind of go from there?
Yeah, that sounds
It
great.
doesn't mean you have to interview 3, but maybe if you just pick your top 3, then we can see kind of what it looks like.
Let's do that. So Ms. Giovanni, or sorry, Dr. Giovanni, you have the table and you'll be marking on here which three we each select.
Yes, I will.
Okay,
And we
thank you.
are, just so the public knows, we also have a paper copy for the minutes as well to record permanently what the board is actually doing. Ms. Smith has that, and I also have one over there, and I'll go grab that, and since she's downstairs at this moment.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much. I would like to ask, is there any other discussion about the process or thoughts about the process? The idea of just going ahead person by person and we each share our top three, and then looking at what we have at that point. Ms. Rogers?
I think my only question would be, do we want to have somebody go through a name and give a basic overview of all 8 of the organizations that have submitted or no?
Do you mean just list their names or?
Yeah,
So I'm, just
I-
read like what's on the screen? Is that what you want?
I mean, it doesn't matter to me if. it's
I'm
not
happy to do that.
necessary.
So I think that's an excellent point in that we kind of maybe, I didn't share that part previously. The board, when you submitted the RFP for the process, their deadline was March 11th at 5 PM Eastern Standard Time. And the 8 firms that are included and being shared on the screen are the firms that submitted timely proposals based on that RFP. Those firms are Alma, BWP, Hazard Young and Associates, NBITS, McPherson, NCSBA, Ray and Associates, and Summit.
Thank you.
And all of their materials that they submitted are available for the public and the board online.
Great. All right, thank you. That was helpful. Other thoughts? All right, let's jump in. Who would like to go first? All right, Ms. Byer.
Happy to get this conversation.
All right, thank you. Somebody else like to go next?
I'll go next.
Great.
The 3 that stood out for me were NCSBA, Summit, and Alma.
All right. All right, thank you. Do you want to add any comments at this point? Okay. All right. Do I add that?
We didn't have a requirement to exclude any strings or connections or networks related to elected officials in Durham, being Durham, or any former DPS employees or any job sites that are connected to anybody in the political space. So we didn't exclude any of that. It's, there's relationships that are already guaranteed, but I really do think for this process, I would like it to be free of political influence as much as possible. And so my first choice is NCSBA. My second choice is InBits. And my third choice is BWP.
All right, thank you. And maybe we can come back to that question of relationships within the different firms and talk about how, get your perspective, Mr. Malone, and what role that might play. All right, Ms. Lewis or Ms. Cardon, would you like to share? Okay.
My top picks are Alma, HYA, and Summit. And I'll say at the top of those is Alma, and that is because there were a couple things that stood out to me. And one is like what felt like a really intentional both track record and effort and description in the way that they are working to incorporate the voices of those that are not normally incorporated in this process. They laid out better than any of the other firms that submitted applications, a process whereby they're going to be able to do that. And they're the one that indicated they're able to lead monolingual Spanish focus groups, interviews and forums, intentional work with even our families with homeless students and our families from immigrant populations. So that felt really impressive to me. They also indicated, and they were, I think, the only one that did this, that they conducted anti-bias training for all interviewers that are part of their process. So again, that just, for me, that they stood out above the others for those reasons.
Thank you. All right. Ms. Lewis?
So I also chose NCSBA, McPherson, and NBITS.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. And my top three were also NCSBA, HYA, and Alma with from their materials and recommendations of others, but I did want to hear more about the relationship piece because I don't want to, I want to be mindful of that. So kind of a caveat there.
I have a question, and this is about transparency with board members here in this actual deliberation and process. How many of you have engaged with folks who have shared a preference for any of these who are elected officials? I'm not saying constituents, I'm saying elected officials, or folks who have formerly worked in the district. And so those were considerations because we just went through many, many questions about work that has been done and delegated to consultants. And that is a serious consideration too. I think that any of these groups, including the local ones, like we get to dictate what we want in terms of this process. Like, do we want them to go to racial equity training? I mean, some of them may not have disclosed that. That's not to say they haven't done it. We can put those stipulations in our expectations of what we want from them. And so we just have to continue to do this process, but also keep in mind the selection of the new superintendent hinges on what the work that these, consultants will do for us. And if there's already influence in any kind of way, then that's fine. It happens anyways, but it's something to consider as well.
I saw that affiliation with Summit, and I saw it with, sorry, I'll look at my notes. Oh, with Ray and Associates, but I am not familiar of that. Like, I'm not, did you want to share more about others? Because I didn't see anything else to indicate that there's a connection between DPS or elected officials for the other groups.
There's definitely, I mean, we can Google it. If you were to put your top choice, so let's start with Alma, just do a Google search. And it's gonna, I mean, I Googled these and I love the fact that we are a community that has so many different intersections in terms of representation and work, but if I had worked for any of these, that would be a conflict for me as a board member. And there's no conflict per se in any of these right now because none of us work for any of these. But that's not to say that there isn't influence in the sense that there are prominent influential people who have worked in, and you know, just Googling Alma, Googling any of these, you know, it's just something to consider. I'm not saying that that excludes. I just want that consideration to be very clear. We have the gift of people who are part of our community, who are also in leadership, who are also, you know, wanting to have the best for our kids, and that is not questioned. You know, the fact that any association is because people care enough about these things and actually worked in this space. And you know, I mean, if I think I've said enough that you all know exactly what I'm talking about, but if you needed me to spell it out, like I will spell it out. It's not a conflict. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just, we have to understand like what those connections are.
Ms. Rogers?
Thank you, Ms. Valladares, for highlighting that. I'm going to share my thoughts on that, and I don't disagree with you. I understand that there's an affiliation with City Councilwoman Javier Caballero to Alma, having worked there as a former educator. But I also understand Dr. Giovanni worked for NCSBA for many years, and we brought her on for that expertise. I don't want us to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I want us to make the best choice in this selection because it's what's right for Durham, what's right for DPS, and really give a thorough looking at each of these agencies, even though they have connections. It's just my request.
I think I want to just pose a question to Dr. Giovanni. You would never bring any of these recommendations in Thornton Smith, right? Attorney Rod Malone. None of these, we have choices, and that's the beauty of it. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These have been vetted by you all first before you brought them to us. You would never, no, you didn't vet them at all.
No.
You
No.
just did it. So there could be organizations here. I mean, we've looked at the materials, but it's like, there could be organizations here that would you say that there are organizations listed on here that would be a detriment to Durham Public Schools? Would that not go through a filter before you even brought this to us?
So what I would say is that you're selecting firms to interview and they responded to the RFP. And it is up to the board to review the materials that were submitted to you and then select who you will interview. But I can say unequivocally that I am completely impartial in serving this board and this community transparently in what I am presenting. So there will be no favoritism. There's been no favoritism or I've not provided any opinion on any of these firms objectively, except what has been shared with the board and Mr. Malone publicly and transparently.
And I have had interactions with Alma Consulting through training that I've done with school board partners. And that's how I got connected with Alma Group. And I came back and I went to other conferences and have talked about Alma Group to other elected officials. And that's how I learned directly from Councilmember Caballero that she worked for them. I didn't know before I interacted with Alma Group.
Ms. Lewis? Thank you.
And just, since we're talking about Alma, and I was looking through my emails, I did remember an email regarding a late submission. And then it did say that was on time. Can you explain what happened there?
I
please?
can. When we initially created the email for DPS superintendent search, I neglected to include an underscore, which is required for our convention, our email convention. It was already sent out in the RFP. People began to attempt to submit it and it was denying it because that email was not correct. I then worked with Ms. Malone and Mr. Majumbi in IT, and Mr. Malone was copied on there that the emails with the underscore would have to be used. So then we changed that, and it should be that emails that were sent without the underscore would come through, but we did have issues with that. I had several test emails that I attempted to send without the underscore that kicked back. Alma did show a screenshot that they sent that to the email that I gave them without the underscore in it and within the time frame. So that is why it was our technology that blocked them from submitting it. And thankfully, they did reach out to me to see if I had received it, but I did, every time we got them, I responded received to each one of the people submitting proposals and forwarded it to Mr. Malone. And when I received the email from them, I then, if you were to pull the emails, you will see that I mandated that they provide me with proof that they had submitted it to that email without the underscore, and they did that. So they were timely. It was an IT technology issue.
All right. Can I have Mr. Malone, if you would share any thoughts about associations that people may have with DPS who work at these agencies? Are there things for us to consider legally? Worked.
So the only legal issues that you have would be your nepotism policy, which would mean that, you know, the ownership of one of these groups is related to you in a familial way as a board member, or it's related to like central office staff, or I guess technically a principal. Is kind of what your policy would say. What the statute would say is that for it to be a conflict, they would need to also have 10% ownership in one of these companies, like one of your family members. But beyond that, the fact that someone used to be a Durham Public Schools employee, has a family member that's a former Durham Public Schools employee, none of that legally would prohibit you from hiring that firm. And I do think that in the questions that you may develop between now and next week, you may want to target some questions in that direction to see how people respond to some of those issues. But you've got the flexibility to hire or not to hire. I mean, you certainly can use that concern as a legitimate basis to not choose a firm if that is a concern of the boards. But there's nothing that would prohibit you from hiring a firm. The only thing that would prohibit it would be, you know, the spouse or, you know, a family member that's like an owner of one of the companies. Beyond that, the most it would require would be disclosure by a board member or a central office staffer.
Candidates. Like when you get into a search and it's a confidential search, applicant names are protected under statute, right?
Well, one of the things that I would presume in your questioning of the candidates that you will want to hear how they handle confidential information. Obviously, one of the most important things in a search like this is confidentiality. One of the decisions that boards often have to make when you get to a finalist or a couple of finalists is whether or not you're going to disclose the names of one or more finalists before you select them, because that is often something that, believe it or not, that will turn off many potential candidates if they know that their name may get out before you've actually decided to hire them. So most of the candidates expect this information to be very confidential. The issues that people have had in the past is when a name gets out, it certainly can create a problem for that person especially if that person is not hired by the board. So,
Dr. Giovanni's got some experience there. She chimed in.
Yes, and I would add, Mrs. Byer, to your point, that that's why it's important that the firms do recognize the confidentiality and that the board, when you hire that firm, that you entrust them to do your background checks and to reach out. Like, it's very important that no board members, if you find out that, that you call a fellow board member at another district, if there's someone that a board wants, once you get to that stage of taking references and finalists, if there's someone the board wants, the search firm to talk to, they share that with the firm and not, you don't go kind of do your own background, because that can get you in trouble with some privacy laws and personnel laws. So just want to lift that up. And to Mr. Malone's point, those are some questions that perhaps as we're crafting the interview questions, we can include. I'm going to make a note and we'll defer to the board on how you want to proceed. But I do think that's an area for inquiry potentially from these firms.
I mean,
Thank
that
you.
is in the sample questions that we have put together, one or more of them deal with that specific issue.
That's helpful, and that's good, a good reminder for us that we can hone in on the things that we want to in our interviews, search firms next week.
Dana.
Welcome, Chair Umstead. And so now, I think,
Ask her for her three,
yeah, yes.
that audio.
Chair Umstead, are you there? All right, while she's getting on, I'm going to just make some observations here. So again, I would like us to go ahead and rule out the ones that clearly aren't falling or coming to the top of our list, and go ahead and try to say yes to those that we can. So NCSBA has five votes there. So are we, and Mr. Malone, will you speak to this? Do we need to vote on each one that we want to interview?
I think it's perfectly acceptable for the board to, once you kind of decide a cutoff, to just say that all that received X number of votes will be interviewed. If there's a tie, you may need to try to vote between two that are tied at the same number of votes. But, or if you want to just say, for instance, NCSBA has 5, do we all agree that we want to interview them for sure? I mean, you can, however you choose to proceed is up to you.
Okay.
Tina said that she's almost online, but is she? Or
I just heard the Zoom, but she also sent me her choices. So let me share those with people. I'm sorry, I forgot.
Good.
I
And-
forgot. Oh,
I'm here, Emily, but if you want to go ahead and share them, I did not share them in any particular order. And excuse me, hello everyone. I am traveling, so not able to be there in person. I have NCSBA, McPherson and Associates, BWP, and then Summit. So I did 4.
and Chair Umstead, if you had to pick 3, could you let go of one of them?
Sure. I'm not sure I have a thought on that at this point.
Okay, all right. So, all right, then looking at this again, NCSBA has the most votes. So I'm just gonna ask, are we okay with go ahead and putting them on our list to interview? Okay, okay. Seeing nods and yeses, hearing yeses. So, all right, we will go ahead and say yes to interviewing NCSBA. Alma is the second top choice with 4 votes. I want to see, do we want to put them on our list? And also, are there things that we should keep in mind? Ms. Valladares, you asked a question about like if people had communications about certain firms. If we did interview Alma, are there things that we might want to put in place, like, or could we put in place, like not having certain conversations with former employees about these firms or what? I'm not sure how to sort of protect the integrity of the process for any firm.
Well, and you need to, if you're, I don't think it's fair to single out any specific search firm and kind of throw a conspiracy theory at one and not at the ones that employ our former people or former board members. So, I mean, I think the topic needs to be addressed broadly and not at all targeted at any specific firm that, at all.
Thank you. I agree. I think there are various associations in here, so.
I have
it-
a moment of personal privilege.
Mhm.
That is a microaggression, Natalie. A conspiracy theory, seriously? Conspiracy theory. We're talking about associations. We just came from a salary study where people said, why did you hire a consultant? Even though they disclose it, there's a certain taste that the community
I
has.
apologize. A concern. I apologize.
This is
You're
this is
right.
about influence. And so, and it's about influence in a process that is supposed to be, as we can't afford, the community says they've lost trust.
Right.
They talk about nepotism, they talk about undue influence, and they talk about ways that, networks, like if it wasn't you in the seat and it wasn't many of you who are connected to certain people and some of the same people, that kind of affects the direction that we take. And so for me, it's even out of protection for all of us, the integrity of this board, to just put that in the conversation publicly and transparently and not say it's not a conflict. I actually think that any of these groups would be great. And that it's so wonderful that there have been people who have cared enough about education to be a part of these efforts. And that's why I said what I said with that. But the taste is.
I apologize for anything that was a microaggression. I am concerned that we respect these people's business and that as we try to work out issues that are amongst ourselves and we talk about who we're going to bring here for the next step as an interview to say, here's how I would do that work. And it's really hard work and it has to be very confidential. And it's very, I mean, it's very secure work, that we not cast any concerns on specific groups that have applied and submitted RFPs. That's my concern, and I apologize for any harm.
Yes, I just want to, I do think this discussion is very important in light of where we've been, and the transparency is really important. So I do appreciate Ms. Valladares bringing up the concerns, and not to say there was a conspiracy, but truly concerns, and saying it's not a conflict, but just that we all know and that we're transparent in this process. I also want to appreciate Ms. Rogers for saying, this is my connection to Alma. This is some of the training that I've done in association with it. I think that conversation is really important to be had. I appreciate having it because I don't always know those nuances. Jessica, you brought up Summit and Rain Associations. And, so just looking through there, you can see who was formerly with DPS. That is very important. So I want to appreciate that being brought out. I'm glad you also took a point of privilege because there was just no maliciousness of a conspiracy of any sort. But I think that the conversation is good for us to have very openly and is transparent for the community. So thank you for that. And thank you, Natalie, for apologizing and just hearing what's being said and taking it in, the intent, not the reaction, but what was the intent. So thank you.
All right, I want to thank you all for sharing your comments, and let's try to move forward with an agreement to a practice here. And again, we do want to apply this to everybody. We want to be mindful of connections. There are a lot of people who, we might know, but what would make sense here? Can you suggest something? Or, I mean, even beyond people who used to work there, are there conversations we should or should not have in the next week?
Some entities, when they're doing an RFQ or an RFP, they will prohibit the interested vendors from making contact with the entity during the process other than like through a particular contact person. So if you were to direct us, Dr. Giovanni could email all of the entities, but primarily the ones that you're going to interview, and let them know that the board has asked that no one contact them or anybody with the school system other than whatever, with questions, during this process and until a selection is made. And, you know, we could certainly do that if there's a concern in that area. And we could expand, we could actually extend that to say that they should also not ask someone, and we can't control random people reaching out to you, but certainly that they should not be behind someone else reaching out to you. We can certainly do that if you'd like to do that, if you think that would help.
Can we just get maybe a thumbs up of consensus on that point? All right, great. Awesome. So we have consensus on that. Thank you, Mr. Malone. That's a great suggestion. And so that will help us move forward, knowing that the decisions are being made here in this room, and just kind of keeping the process centered where it's supposed to be. So, all right. So we have 4 for Alma. So I'm going to ask if we can move ahead with Alma then, since they're the second highest.
Going ahead and inviting 4 groups if, rather than 3, since there is this concern that has been raised about them. And I'm also a little unsure about how we move forward, that Chair Umstead has 4 votes on that board. That is throwing the math a little bit. Mathematically, do we all go ahead and put our 4th, or how are you thinking that it would be helpful to proceed?
Okay. All right.
At this point,
Thank you
maybe
for
she's
that.
ready to remove one.
Yeah,
That would be
that
the
would-
simplest way.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Chair Umstead, we will gently nudge you to please take one off your list.
I would take off McPherson off my list.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, so again, are we,
It does if you're going to interview 4.
Yeah.
Because then you have 2 or 3.
all right, so let's make a couple of decisions perhaps. Can we say we will agree to interview Alma with 4 votes, or do we need more conversation about that?
I
We
thought
did
you-
that?
yeah,
Oh,
I
I
thought
just
you
didn't see
agreed that.
thumbs up, but is there, okay, all right. All right. I saw half a thumb over here, so I took that, okay.
No.
All right, so we have 2. Now, we have Ms. Byers' suggestion to interview 4. Do you all want to move forward with just saying we'll do 4 rather than 3,
Right.
knowing that we like choices?
Yeah, BWP and Summit.
Okay, all right, and yeah, BWP and Summit have 3, and the rest of them have 2, 1, or 0, so. Great. That is complete then. Well, amazing. Good job, board. Now we, I guess I'll make some comments again about just the interview questions. We want to keep in mind that we want to send any revisions of the questions or suggested questions to Chair Umstead by today, if you haven't already. And then we will again interview our candidates next Wednesday, March 20th. And then we will choose a search firm on March 21st, and then we will get rolling with them. Many of the proposals include timelines, and so we will try to jump on that and look forward to hiring our next superintendent within the next few months. And let's see, is there anything else you would like to say? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Mullins.
So 2 questions. One, do you have thoughts on the length of these interviews? Dr. Giovanni and I had thrown around 30 minutes with maybe a 15-minute break in between each one. But that's just us sitting around. And then the other question to think about is, do you have a particular order? You want to take them alphabetically? You want to put them in some other order
Are
as
they
it relates to
in person?
scheduling them?
Are they in person or are they virtual? For them, they are coming in person?
That's what we had assumed.
Yeah,
That's what we had assumed, that if they are interested in doing this work, which is going to occur here in Durham, that they will be
I think
here.
that's best, yeah,
to
just
see you.
making sure.
All right, that's great that we clarified that. So 30 minutes, are people okay with 30-minute interviews? 15 minutes?
I think 10 or 15 between is so important because they run long, I think they will run long.
To come and go.
Yeah.
That's what we were thinking.
Based on previous experience doing this, for those who've been involved in this in the past, is 30 minutes enough time? Feels like a very big decision.
I will say with 30 minutes, we might not have that many questions that are so we would have to probably narrow our questions down. I might say 45, but anything longer than that feels like it might be too long. So that's just one thing to consider.
And I will say that part of the idea of having 15 minutes in between was that it gave you that little buffer. I mean, some of the questions may end up being kind of a yes, no answer. So anyway, but whatever you choose is fine. We can certainly make them 45 minutes with 15 minutes in between each one if you prefer. Or we can make them 40 minutes. I mean, there's no magic to this, whatever you want.
And I can add, I'm okay with 30. I just wanted to name that it would narrow. We need to be really specific about the questions that we're going to ask and have a, smaller set. That's all.
Thanks, Chair Umstead. I have a related question, which is, what about references? Are we doing reference checks for all of these search firms, or what were your thoughts? And what has been done in the past with
It looks like
references?
that's included in most of the like in their applications. They said that they're going to be doing the reference checks for.
No,
people.
she's talking about for the
Oh,
firm.
for the firm.
Yeah, sorry, I think.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
correct. Are-
So I believe
Some of
that-
them sent references.
Right, the RFQ did require them to provide some references. If, I guess the thought, let's think this through. Do you want to, I guess one option is that you could make a selection subject to reference checks that we could do afterwards. Or which is probably better than us trying to do references on 4 firms. I think it's probably better to pick your chosen firm and then actually spend time on that one instead of trying to do 4. But whatever you like to do, and we will help, or Tanya will, whatever you like to have us do, we'll be happy to help in any way.
How do people feel about doing reference checks for the final candidate that we select? Or do you all feel that it's not necessary? Some of them do, some of them do have letters, and also some of them have contacts in their materials.
So I would say this, unlike hiring an employee that you are somewhat saddled with indefinitely, if you hire someone and it's not going well, you can move on to another search firm. So I don't know that you have to do a reference check, but you certainly can do that if that's what you like to have us do. Again, unlike an employee, I guess we would reach out to some of the clients and recent clients and find out what their experiences were like, and we can certainly do that if you like.
Is there any precedent for the board chair and vice chair to make calls specifically to 3 recent districts that they've worked with or something prior to selection?
So I would say this, not many of our clients do this version of selecting a search firm. Most of them just choose a search firm. And so this is not normal. I would say that like when you hire architects, which is a similar RFQ kinds of process, you know, I don't know how much school systems actually call around to former clients to find out their experiences with those vendors. You know, vendors are a little different than employees, but I mean, we certainly can, or again, if you want to say that, and you'd have some time between Wednesday and Thursday to make some calls that, and I'm happy, and I'm sure Tanya, Dr. Giovanni would be happy to call and do some reference checking on the selected firm. And that wouldn't be that complicated. Happy to do that.
Thank you. I'm not seeing enthusiastic responses necessarily from people, so yeah, we don't need to do it if people don't feel it's necessary. Go ahead.
I wonder if we wait to see whether it feels necessary or not. Sometimes you do reference checks with the idea that like you have specific questions you want answered or like concerns you want addressed in those, and we don't know yet if that will be the case. So maybe we know that there are options and we hold off for now since we have letters of recommendation for folks. That's my suggestion, but open to others.
Okay.
And also, I want to remind the board of the document that I sent around from other board members nationwide that have worked with so many of these firms that submitted their documentation. So I encourage you to look at that. And I know that it's public record now that I sent it to all you guys. So I want to make clear that I have some relationship with some of those people, others I don't. And so take what you want and leave what you don't.
Thank you.
But one thing you could do is we could add into our questions, maybe make your last question, a list the last 3 or 4 searches that they did. I know it was in the RFQ. I'm not sure how everybody responded, but if we got everybody to give their last 3 or 4 school system clients, then we can, I mean, there's no reason we can't make some calls Thursday morning. And
Particularly the team that they would assign to Durham.
Yeah, where
specifically,
where
those
that
three.
team
Yeah,
worked.
yeah.
And then we can easily, I mean, we have all day Thursday to make some calls. So I can't imagine we couldn't get that done between the two of us.
Okay, great. Well, let's formally cross that bridge when we come to it on next Wednesday. And we'll see if we're feeling like that's absolutely something we want to do, and appreciate you all's willingness to make those calls. And with that, no, sorry, I was gonna say, with that, I will suggest that we do 30-minute interviews. But if folks are okay with that and we'll leave 15 minutes, we can go over 5 minutes if we need to. Yeah, is there a consensus about that? Okay. All right.
And I'll just, I mean, if you think that's not enough time, I mean, we can do 40 minutes and 10 minutes in between or something like that. I mean, I mean, you shouldn't feel rushed. And if 30 minutes doesn't seem like enough time, then let's, especially if some of these people are coming in from out of town or whatever, let's make sure that you.
I think if we're okay with 30 minutes, we can keep it at that. We also kind of maybe want to be at our best by the time we get to the last firm, but what do folks think?
You wanna go ahead?
No, I just trying to remember the last time we did this. It's, and I think having read their materials ahead of time freshly, I think you'll be familiar with which is which and who's on what team and stuff, and that's super helpful. And I just thought it was most helpful to just get a feel for the team that might come and work in Durham and how they answer some of the equity questions, right? And the focus and whether they'd be a good fit. That's kind of what I felt like I was evaluating for. So I think that can be done in 30-ish. I do think they'll run over 5 or 10. So, I mean, it's however you want to schedule out a series. That's
I'm just gonna say that I'm fine with 30, and I think that our ability to do that will depend on how tight we can get the interview questions, and the rubric beforehand to make sure that we're, as focused as possible. Some of the current interview questions are already answered in the application, so we could go ahead and potentially remove those unless there's an issue with doing that. But relatedly, I wanted to know what our process would be at this point for refining our list of interview questions. Has that been determined, or what are the thoughts on that?
Thank you for bringing that up. So
That was what I was making sure you weren't adjourning on. So obviously you won't have another open session before then. And so I would ask if the board would be comfortable with sending kind of those questions to me and Mr. Malone and allowing us to go through kind of the applications and hone those down. And then we could come in a little, right at the beginning of the meeting and make sure that y'all were kind of happy with them. But both of us have done this, kind of process, and we know, like I know, and Mr. Malone kind of have an idea of what's important in Durham for those questions. So we had just initially sent just kind of blanket questions to give you something to react to, right? And y'all have reacted. So, which is, the Durham way, right? And so I guess what I'm just asking is if we can maybe get consensus to trust me and Mr. Malone to get your feedback and then craft questions that will fit in a 30-ish time span so that you don't feel rushed, and the firms who've come, this far feel like they've had an opportunity to really show you and respond to the questions that you have. So if that's okay, we can do that like that, if the board's okay with that. Since you won't have another open meeting and you can't kind of have a meeting by email, right, with all of you. So
yeah, I would say that, thank you for doing that. That sounds good. And could we see a draft of that
yes.
by when would that maybe be ready?
So have y'all all reacted and given feedback?
Not
if every-
everyone has done that.
So today is Wednesday. So if everyone can get feedback by tomorrow, Mr. Malone and I can have a draft back to y'all. What do you say, Monday, Rod? Monday at noon,
Okay.
Rod? Can you? Monday, I don't know, March, I don't know what the day is, but March, whatever, Monday. Thank you.
18th,
March
okay.
18th by noon. We'll get you the draft, and then we would need back, probably give you 24 hours to react to that on Tuesday at noon, and then because we have to print them for y'all to come so you can have them, so.
That
Okay,
leave us
great.
one question apiece, probably, if we were assigning them out, probably.
So depending on the question, on average, you expect 2 to 3 minutes for an answer, right? On average for
Yep.
these types of questions. So I think, kind of let us play with
So
it.
10
And
questions or so, and then, yeah.
it's 7 of y'all. And so it depends on, we try to give everybody the same number of questions. So that's, I think, where we were at 14, right? I think the last time.
We started at 14, yes.
Yeah. So, these are a little different than like interviews of individuals, right? I mean, this is like a search firm. So I think you'll be fine even with the 14 questions that you ask. I think, depending on the questions, but we have to kind of react to them, and it could be some questions are really 2-part questions. I see that a lot. I've seen that a lot from boards where the questions are like a paragraph. So it may be that some of those we have to kind of hone down or split between 2 board members, but I think that the equitable way for me and what I'm most comfortable with is having every board member ask the same number of questions, which would be 14. And then if we go 5 minutes over, right, but everybody's had those 2 questions and feels like they've asked and had a chance to hear answers to what is important to that board member, I think you'll feel better. That's my recommendation.
The only thing I'd add is if you believe that a question has already been adequately answered in the materials, then let us know that, because we definitely don't need to waste time asking a question that you already feel like has been covered in the materials. And that may help too. So let us know that.
Well, and I was gonna say, I'm comfortable asking one question, and, I mean, I just listened to the answers, and I think we all have the same concern, so I don't think that, I'd rather 10 good answers than short answers, but.
Which is why I'm saying if you feel like a question's been answered, then let's just cut that out, and then we can play with the other questions and make sure people have time.
And I think that the person, when we send it on Monday, right, by noon, for example, Mrs. Byer, like if there's two questions that are in there for you and you're like, that question I don't feel like is that important, like each board member is able to say, the question you've assigned to me is not something that I'm interested in. And then the other board members can maybe say, well, I would still like that answer. And we have a few minutes right before we start the interviews, an open session for that feedback and kind of tweak it. Like you'll have it printed out. And if we need to make notes and tweak it and move it around, because I do agree with you. I think that it is, you only get one shot, right? And you want to make sure that you're getting the answers that you need, not in a performative way. So that's kind of where I would live with. I'm not comfortable taking a question from Ms. Byer, but Ms. Byer, I'm just using you because you can say, no, I don't want this question. Or Ms. Chavez can say, well, I don't like my question, but I do want to ask that question that was assigned to Ms. Byer. And, we'll take just a few minutes at the beginning and we can kind of make those notes. And you're only doing 4, right? I mean, that's not, and once we do that, we'll be here, right? And so if we need to go print anything else out, or anything, we have access to that.
All right, does that sound okay with everybody?
So one more thing then. If we're gonna start at 5, do you want to start the interviews at 5:15? So that you guys can get here, get set up? I mean, because if you don't want to start late, because then you'll be running late the whole time. And then that also will give you time to get the questions straight, make sure everybody's comfortable before we get started. Does that make sense? I've done some of this before, believe it or not. Okay, great.
Sounds good. All right, so we'll start at 5, start interviews at 5:15. 30 minutes, 15 minutes in between. All right.
Last question, sorry.
Yep.
Do you guys want to take them alphabetically? Is that easiest?
I think that sounds fine. Fair? Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. All right, I think that's it. Any other discussion? Right, and with that, we are adjourned.